Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Simon Mills. I'm a Senior Associate at the Zen Group, and I'd like to welcome you all to the 605th Lord Mayor's Lecture, where we're going to be taking a Jules Verne tour of hydrogen around the world. And I'm joined by two distinguished speakers today. We have Ashutosh Shastri, who is the founder of Innostrat Consulting, a London-based international strategic management consultancy practice in the energy sector. Ashutosh is currently serving as a junior warden in the worshipful company of Fuelers. I'm also joined by Eric Raku, who is a consultant with BCG for over 20 years experience of advising clients around the world on energy issues and the energy transition. Now, as always, the agenda for this webinar is very simple. Following my introduction, our speakers will make their presentation and then we'll move on to the Q&A discussion. Now, I'm afraid that you are all muted, but you are able to submit your questions through the chat tool, which is on the right-hand side of your screen. Please do chip in at any point of the proceedings. I'm going to be collating your questions and I will put them to our speakers at the end. And so, without further ado, I would like to introduce the first of today's speakers. Ash, tell us about the energy transition and the role of hydrogen.
Simon, good afternoon. Thank you very much and welcome everyone to the Lord Mayor's Knowledge Miles discussion on hydrogen. I represent the worshipful company of Fuelers, and we are delighted to be supporting the Right Honourable Mayor's initiative on Knowledge Miles. The subject of hydrogen has been attracting quite a lot of interest over the last couple of years in particular. I am not going to stand too much between the principal speaker, but on behalf of the Fuelers, I want to say thank you to the Lord Mayor and to Zen to be able to give us the opportunity. The Lord Mayor, in his annual Ezra lecture to the Fuelers, titled his speech as the end of the rainbow colors of hydrogen, the ends of the rainbow colors of hydrogen. And really what this discussion really is about is that in reality today 99% of hydrogen is actually around blue hydrogen. And I have only 2 points to make before Eric takes the lead. One is that it might be a better idea perhaps to not to get too caught up into these rainbow colors and try and be technologically neutral and just get on with it, because this classification exercise doesn't have a very good history. Some of you might recall that the European Commission tried to do a European taxonomy for carbon intensity of various different technologies. And whilst in the financial world we all talk about policy ought to be technology agnostic and policymakers should not be making technology choices, unfortunately the rainbow approach ends up becoming policymakers making technology choices. So that is something, that is the first point I would like to make. And second is that hydrogen idea is not new, and I just want to kind of take you to the next slide really, which is I want to show you some slides which were made in the year 1999-2000 when I was a young analyst working for McKinsey, and we were participating in hydrogen. And this, I had the opportunity when the hydrogen debate picked up to pick up on some of my slides which I had done more than 20 years ago. Now you will note that at that point in time in 1999, the production cost estimates or the ambition was to get down to $6 to $8 per MMBTU, slightly higher today than what we've achieved, and Eric will probably be covering a little bit more detail on the production costs. And in some areas on $10 to $15 per MMBTU. And all of this technology validation was going to happen between 2001 and 2002. The source for this was the US Department of Energy's hydrogen research work. And on the next slide, if you look at, Sasha, if you would please, then not all of those ideas were realized, but a lot of them actually did make into commercial reality in 2020. So when we speak today in terms of learning rates and try and attribute some mechanistic approaches to saying what might happen, what might not happen, I think the only learning lesson for from the last 20 years has been that innovation works in a non-linear fashion, and what might seem a, an impossibility might actually happen quite easily. And I will end with my final point that in 1958-59, a trial cargo of liquefied natural gas was started and came to Canvey Island from the United States. 60 years down the line, we have a global LNG market. So if we have been able to create a global LNG market in a space of 60 years, much of that technology and development is already now in place. Much of the learnings from the LNG industry are in place, and therefore it might not be too ambitious to believe that the scale up cannot be achieved. That being said, it is really instructive to understand that what we are talking in terms of a scale up for by 2050 is a 5 to 10x times challenge, and this is a pretty big scale up challenge. And this is something which will require not only innovation, but it will also require a stakeholder approach which and cooperation across the world, which um, will be very critical to achieve. So those are the only 2 or 3 points I would like to make. And of course, I'll be participating and happy to be taking questions in the Q&A session. Thank you.
So, Ash, that was a great historic tour de force. I was thinking back, I guess also somewhere around that 99, from my memory, in 2000, one of the American presidents made a speech and said, it must have been Bush, I think. And Bush said, the child that is born today, so that's 2000, right? That child would be 24, will drive a fuel cell hydrogen car. So George Bush was right? But he was probably meaning that all the cars would be hydrogen driven. But in Japan, there are a few. There are buses. For example, in China, there are quite a lot of them. So let's say on the Asian side of things, we do see a bit more hydrogen in personal or perhaps state mobility. In Europe, this, and including UK, this is yet to take off. So we do, well, I guess I would credit Bush being a smart president, not attaching any numerics. And I was just, again, looking to Ash figures. There were different aspects at the time that particular strategy consultant forecasted for hydrogen economy, and there were no figures. A bit about myself. My name is Eric Raku. Next to working with BCG, and soon I will also be a BCG alumnus. I will be actually having my own consulting company. I do a podcast, Global Tales of Carbon Transition, and we interview various energy leaders. And I also co-authored a global hydrogen book called Touching Hydrogen Future. It's now read in over 130 countries and downloaded more than 11,000 times. And today I'm with you from Oman, where I actually just handed this book to Under Secretary of Energy, because Oman is also, for example, developing hydrogen based on solar energy and then planning to export it across the world, replacing oil in a way. If you want to connect to me, just point your phone to this particular symbol and go on LinkedIn. I'm an open networker. Now let's switch to the next slide and go into some hydrogen. So why hydrogen? There are 3 reasons that it's working out. It is a key climate measure. And if you build an abatement curve of what are my solutions, for example, as a heavy industrial to reduce my CO2 exposure. And for example, under European rules of CSRD, you need to start reporting in the next few years. What is your plan to work towards Paris Agreement, then one of the things you may include in your plan is to actually do hydrogen. Is hydrogen answer to all the measures? Absolutely not. You should always do some careful analysis, maybe employ a consultant like Ash to very carefully to think, okay, do I go electric? Do I need energy efficiency? It's very often that hydrogen is the second best solution. The economics right now without subsidies, at least in UK and Europe, will not work. They are, though, in term improving. And it also really depends what do you compare. So once we start pricing externalities like the carbon price, that is, for example, last time one can look is now roughly around 60 euro USD per ton across Europe. But in the 2030s, particularly as the market will be made more scarce, this is predicted to go between 100 and 200. So if that happening, then hydrogen solutions are in the money. Also things like carbon capture, electrification. So many more things are actually waiting for that carbon price signal. Now, next to improving economics, also power supply is really critical if you're looking at green, or natural gas pricing if you're looking at blue. Also power of nuclear energy, very popular in UK, last I heard, in a place called Hinkley. Also can be part of, let's say, a way to use nuclear energy that is no longer perhaps used because there is so much renewable on the system. So all ways to improve economics if there is more supply of power at better rates and the comparable cost of the fossil alternative is priced appropriately, reflecting the incentives. So, and we see a huge policy support. In US, we see Inflation Reduction Act measures subject to election outcome. We see Europe proceeding also in this term. If you read the mission letters of their commissioners, there is also clear signal that hydrogen and industrial competitiveness are in for another 5 years. And if you look further across the globe, countries like China, India, actively pushing hydrogen, also countries like Japan. And well, as I mentioned, also other economies like UAE or Oman are equally out there investing in hydrogen supply. The key buyers, who will be those? Let's move to the next slide. So hydrogen trade will emerge, and we'll get to that in a moment. There is quite a bit of use cases, right? So we were already briefly in my intro spoke of mobility, where on one side, it's probably more maritime aviation sectors that are now taking off. And then the upper side of this slide on the right, as you see. Then you would have more of process industries, heavy to abate industries, steel, petrochemicals, refining. That is actually taking up also under pressure from decarbonization targets, internal targets, rather well. And then we have power generation. That's a big question mark. But I think with at least, again, Europe taking the lead here in standardization, with recently recent German Kraftwerkstrategie, which means power generation strategy, where they're proposing to build hydrogen-ready power plants and to auction for those, and based on natural gas, and then with an obligation to, in a certain date, to switch to hydrogen. I think the discussion about hydrogen and power generation as a way of storing long-term energy is about to kick off, and I'm very interested in that aspect as well, because I think that's the promise of hydrogen actually to help their intermittency issue, because batteries at the end can do 4 to 8 hours, but we may need a few more days as we are building a renewable energy system. Unless, of course, perhaps we just build a lot of nuclear energy. That's obviously also perhaps an outcome. Let's go to next slide. So globally, trade is emerging. There are two major places in the world where the buyers are. So that's Europe on one hand, because that's where the intensive energies industries in particular are, and it's Korea and Japan. These are also short energy, and hydrogen and transported, as it looks now, in form of ammonia is the way to go. That's where the initial first deals are being made. Next slide. What are those places in the world where hydrogen could be sourced? And most importantly, where it can be competitively made. So with the subsidies, it could be United States, it could be Middle East, and then at a certain point, looking kind of much later, it could be European countries. I deliberately haven't included UK on here, but there is at least Australia on there from Commonwealth, so or Canada. So in that sense, I hope I still catered for the varied interests of City of London. The general message, if you see from here, is that energy that you need to put to, in case of green hydrogen, to break down water is a key component, and places where you have large load factors, so that means much more continuous supply of either solar or wind or a combination thereof, you have more competitive economics. Also in places where you have access to competitive natural gas, be it Middle East, Norway, or United States, that's also the place to make blue hydrogen. And in addition, there are very attractive subsidies in US in particular at the moment for the next 10 years or so. Next slide. You also need infrastructure because the demand we spoke about, varied sectors, and the supply, you need to connect those. In Europe, there is the plan of a backbone, and in green, you see already first investment decisions having been made, be it France or be it Netherlands. So it's no longer just a PowerPoint. There are things being built where demand and offtake is being connected. Other countries take rather a valley or hydrogen-based approach, and they prefer that everything is already in cluster, so you don't need to invest in large pipeline systems. And it looks that with its hubs, for example, United Kingdom is taking rather that direction, or perhaps US as well with its hubs and clusters. So you can have varied view on that. More of a global trading model where, for example, Germany, Europe seems to be adding, or one where you rely everything kind of close. So I guess, for example, blue hydrogen type of project that are being explored in UK. Next slide. That leads, this is the final slide of this. So for discussion, I think let's first explain the left. So if we take two measures, how liquid is the market, and we look how easily you can globally move a certain commodity, then right at the top, you would have crude oil. That's very liquid, you could invest in it, you could globally move it. Somewhere in the middle of this, you would find natural gas. If you then very, very far down left, so very non-liquid, very non-yet globally tradable, you will find a hydrogen and its derivatives today. So what would it take to make the same move as natural gas made over 50, 60 years to the middle of this? Well, there are a few things one can think about. So, and that's a bit of an action list that if once you're kind of, you see that some of that is happening, right? So is there, is hydrogen a multiversal electron that can help as, let's say, often second best solution in hard to electrify sectors? Yes, it can. Should you immediately rush out and buy a personal car? Probably, at least not yet. Should you look for where is a surplus in hydrogen supply and try to work on trading platforms? Perhaps you should. Should you think about infrastructure? Absolutely. And there are people thinking about it. I do take that in UK there is still things like decision to use hydrogen in heating or not, stopping that kind of decision making, because obviously, frankly, that makes a huge difference, at least for UK. So don't be distracted by what you read in UK press about hydrogen. Zoom out globally is my advice. Don't be blinded by discussions like heating, however good or bad that discussion is. Now, there is also things like how do I transport it globally? So there is quite a bit of R&D on ammonia cracking. So ammonia looks to be winning as their vector. There are ships being ordered. A few hundred are on the hands, and there are more coming. And then the question becomes, okay, where is my import terminals? In Europe, there is 60 under planning, 16. And some of them with ammonia cracking. And then you connect it to some of the hydrogen backbones. And it becomes quite possible that projects like now being exploited by energy majors in Oman, where one can buy in an auction 300 square kilometers for a concession and then invest billions to make solar-based hydrogen converted to ammonia, transported to countries like Europe, and that trade actually starts looking to become viable. But what do we need for that? At least this decade, we do need a bit of policy push continued, at least supportive. Mandates can be a way. You don't always need to give subsidies. We also need to start pricing in carbon externalities. Voluntary carbon markets can help, and not just on hydrogen, on many more solutions. Last slide, please. So whilst we go to the next slide, which contains a thank you, and people will be looking at that last slide with a thank you. Yeah, I'd like you to ask a question Simon kindly moderated, which you see in a question chat. So how much of your pension funds would you invest in hydrogen-related investments? Do we have a vote?
Interesting.
Well, the votes are still coming in.
Wow.
Fantastic. But by the way, how many total attendance do we have today, roughly?
We've got 89 people attending today's webinar.
Oh, according to laws of statistics, but Ash may correct me, it's a pretty good sample.
Yeah.
Oh,
amazing.
No. Let's not go. Oh, you're trying. I think Sasha is trying to help us because obviously, as votes come in, then the votes that are happening influencing other votes. But still, wow! I'm very positively surprised how, let's say, risk ready this audience is. I was expecting, I'll be very honest, because I asked this question to roughly 1,000 people of World Hydrogen Congress, where everybody supposedly likes hydrogen, and most of them voted under 10%. So that was a larger sample of people who are supposed to really, really know what hydrogen investments, at least what it takes to build them. To be fair, that vote was 2 years ago. So things perhaps have changed.
Eric,
Perhaps
I'd like to pick up at that point, actually. You've asked the question of our audience as to how many would be willing to invest their pensions in hydrogen, and this poses an interesting question. Many people, me included, have decarbonised their investments, which leads to a problem. Many major fossil fuel companies, such as BP, are actually investing very heavily in hydrogen. How do we square the circle and actually get the investment into the sector that it needs?
May I take that a
Ash,
little? Yes. Well, I would say that the decarbonizing your investments and not having access to a company like BP or a Shell or any of the major oil companies is not probably a very helpful idea, for the simple reason that much of the new vectors that will come from these much of the activity around the development in these companies is actually happening on these vectors. Now, if you looked at my first slide, natural gas cracking is 99% of current hydrogen production in the world. And if you believe in a world where policymakers don't make technology choices, then it is companies like BP who will actually be the least cost producers of hydrogen globally in different parts of the world. And they might be the very agencies which might enable this hydrogen revolution if it is to come. And so that is why I personally believe that this decarbonization of investments and a blanket ban or something like is trying to what is the phrase, using a hammer to kill a fly. kind of an approach, because the shape and character and positioning of these firms has changed quite a lot. I'm also very surprised. I mean, the question, to be fair, was, would you invest in hydrogen? I would say uh, the way the responses came out, I felt that it was more around the hydrogen and hydrogen supply chain. For the only example, and I know I gave a 20-year perspective as to almost like a bad penny, hydrogen has come back. But there is only one company that has that kind of a track record so far, which is more than 25 years in the hydrogen space, and that is a company called Ballard Power Systems. And Ballard Power Systems, in the early 2000s, reached a stock price of about $150. Then, for most of from 2005 till about 2020, it hovered around $2, $3. It is again $50, $60. So I think, let me just check. The last I checked, it was it is right. Today it is again $1.70, $1.70. But it came close to about $45 in 2022. So if you look at again, one company is not an indicator. I think the dialectic and the conditions in 2000 that were there are no longer there. I think we are in a much more mature, globalized system where the development and knowledge sharing around hydrogen is happening at an exponential rate. Awareness is pretty high, and most of that success of creating a LNG based system, for example, that has happened in 60 years. So there is no reason to believe that in the next 30-40 years you would actually not be in a scenario where maybe it is not only hydrogen trade, only LNG trade, but a universal gas platform emerges. And if that universal gas platform emerges, then vectors such as ammonia become the most energy dense carriers. So you would possibly invest in ammonia production. You might possibly invest in electrolyzer manufacturing. You might possibly invest in specialized gas cleanup solutions. So the investment landscape is actually quite bigger, wider, and more mature.
So there is a big universe there. It's also worth pointing out there is nothing to stop companies such as BP issuing green bonds specifically for investment in hydrogen. So that might be one way to get around people's view on decarbonisation. Now we have a lot of questions to get through, so let's start with the first one. And Ash, again, this is another one for you. What proportion of total emissions involved in blue hydrogen can practically be stored?
That's a great question. The allusion obviously is towards the convergence of industries between hydrogen and carbon capture and storage. That carbon capture element is actually now carbon capture utilization and storage. And again, I would love to beat the drum for the United Kingdom here, that it is one country where we are actually at the forefront of the industrial clusters where hydrogens and carbon capture systems are co-located. There are not many countries around the world who seem to have got it right. In fact, my practice had written a position paper in 2006 on this cluster approach for hydrogen and CCUS. So it is hard to say what proportion would be stored or sequestered in perpetuity. But what is interesting is that more applications around carbon utilization are emerging. In particular, I'm, of course, again, it is still very early days, but sustainable aviation fuels is a Fischer-Tropsch equation, which means that much of the captured carbon dioxide could go back as a feedstock for the production of synthetic or e-methane. And much of the refining world and much of the big oil world technology investments are actually in that space, which is why I come back saying, a ham-handed approach saying no investments in international oil companies might be an approach that might be missing a trick.
Now, this is a question for both of you. What importance do you attach to energy density? And how is energy density going to affect the future of hydrogen versus electric in transport?
It sounds like the question is a bit leading in itself, right? Because that means that, let's say, batteries, for example, in trucks would be disadvantaged versus hydrogen. However, I guess we need to watch how other things will develop, right? Because right now, for example, just to argue against the hydrogen trucks for a bit, even though I am for hydrogen trucks, one could argue not all trucks want to make 1,000 kilometer or 800 kilometer non-stop routings. It's absolutely okay to do, a resting break after 400 kilometers. So depending if, let's say, electrification infrastructure does pan out, I mean, you do need quite a material access to power grids for those trucking rests. If that does work out, well, then I think electric trucking will have a pretty fair chance, despite the fact that perhaps energy density will be pushing us towards hydrogen fuel cell trucks. So that's just my humble view, that it's energy density is interesting, but I think actually how quickly will electricity infrastructure be built out around refueling is just as interesting. Ash, yours.
I am a fan of energy density, and I think energy density is the missing trick. Because if you look at solar, wind, you don't get the level of energy density, whereas nuclear, you get that energy density. It, when it comes to particularly transport applications, there are of course safety issues around ammonia, handling of hydrogen, etc. So those are the factors which need to be taken into consideration. But uh, it is a hard to call contest between batteries and dense gases, LNG, for example, or hydrogen. Now, between LNG and hydrogen, assuming that almost the verisimilitude in their supply chain systems, you would expect LNG to win in energy density terms, in terms of market model maturity terms. But when it comes to electrification, I think the devil is in the details of the development of the grid. And that is really not technology investment but infrastructure investment, which brings me to my other pet peeve, which is that not all decarbonization investments are in high technology areas. Basic infrastructure, low carbon technology investments are good enough, and they probably constitute 60 to 70% of the investment landscape.
Well, now here is a fascinating question about certification. As we know, hydrogen is produced on a rainbow spectrum. How can you ensure that there is certification for green hydrogen, which is absolutely rock solid, and brown hydrogen isn't actually making it into the mix?
I think on my side, Europe seems to be slowly getting it right. So in a very lengthy way. So they first went out to legislate in great detail in a so-called delegated act what is green hydrogen and called it renewable fuels of non-biological origins, or RFNBO. Now, based on that, they afterwards said, okay, we're going to approve auditors and schemes that are able to certify and assure that something is really green, or RFNBO in language of Europe. And they've just actually, in the last 2 weeks, released the names of the 3 certification agencies that have been vetted to be able to do just what you asked. Assure that something is truly green. And don't ask me for the names. I've written it down somewhere, but the note is not with me today. So I'm in Oman. Sorry.
Fair enough. Now, this is an interesting one. You spoke a bit earlier about making new power plants in Germany hydrogen ready. what is the cost premium for doing this? Is it a relatively straightforward matter, or are there some expensive engineering solutions required?
Well, I guess short answer is it will depend per plant. It's definitely doable. There are companies like Mitsubishi very actively working it, GE, Alstom. I mean, if you Google, I think there is a very good paper by European Association of turbine manufacturers saying we are absolutely ready for this type of question at the latest, 2028, 2029. If you also, Siemens Energy is another example. So it's definitely doable. And like, depending on the plant, I guess you'll have different costs. Now, I do have a challenge on that because I have a good friend who used to build CCUS ready coal-fired power plants. Now, he told me, and I hope this will not be the case for this plant, he told me the way that plant was made CCS ready, the coal ready one, was just they had a piece of land next to the coal plant, which had a sign, here we will build CCUS equipment.
There's a politician's solution if ever there was one.
So I'm very hopeful that at least Germany will take lessons from such, let's say, policy implementation. As a citizen, I would hate to see this kind of thing happen.
Yeah, I think the only addition I would make to Eric's answer is that in CCUS there was eventually kit, a bolt-on kit, which basically you paid a efficiency penalty for. So you use supercritical steam, which gave you 48% efficiency as opposed to 33% efficiency, and then you paid a 12 to 15% efficiency penalty, thereby effectively making the plant 35% efficient. But at least that 35% efficiency came with zero carbon. Now, it would be interesting to actually see. We have not seen any of those specifications actually come out from the manufacturers yet, but I would expect them to perhaps give some guidance around the calorific value and therefore the heat rates, and potentially, if any, efficiency penalty. Those are the two things I would possibly look out for.
Absolutely, and this is a perfect example of where the European Union's carbon markets actually provide a very strong incentive for investment, because a hydrogen power plant won't have to buy carbon credits. Right, okay. Now, this one might be a tricky one. What subsidies, grants, or funding options are available for hydrogen in the UK?
I think the short answer is several across different elements of the hydrogen value chain. It will take a level of specialization that I do not possess to work out all the different schemes that are currently ongoing across the country in terms of how, because it is really driven by the project configuration. So whether you are eligible for a certain grant in a certain local area, or whether you are a participant in a particular carbon capture cluster, or whether you are in a particular electricity distribution zone. So a whole lot of those factors actually are at play, based on which the range of potential pots of money are accessible or available.
Right.
And
now,
on my side, I would advise do Google for something with mystific abbreviations, HRR, so HAR1. So that was a hydrogen allocation round one. So there were some an example of subsidies allocated by UK government.
But the Treasury,
And
yes.
I think there you will find a wealth of companies examples. So they're just absolutely seconding Ash there that there is more there, but that's just an example. If you want an example, go look there. I think if you compare, I remember having done comparison UK versus, for example, Denmark or European Hydrogen Bank. And frankly, in that first round, it looked like UK government paid much more per, let's say, decarbonization unit than the auctions that were organized by
The
some other
European Union.
countries. So
Yeah.
there was, I think, a bit of criticism. But I do feel that I think what I'm kind of talking to people in United Kingdom, they're filled with positivism about the way decarbonization is developing versus many other things.
Now, you mentioned the US's IRA subsidies being dependent on the outcome of the US election. Obviously, things are
Which is a
totally up
very
in the
personal view. It's not
Yeah.
a, somebody else. It's Eric Ruck view, just for avoidance of doubt, right? Yeah. Okay.
Okay, I think the answer to that one is who knows what's going to happen. We're living in interesting times. Right, my goodness, we've got so many questions to get through. Let's have a look. Where are we? Right, what are some of the downsides of a hydrogen revolution?
Well, we cannot electrify then, can we?
Well, I
And
disagree with you, Eric. I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I am actually quite agnostic about the use of hydrogen as in transportation, but I think that hydrogen has an immensely important part to play in green steel manufacturing, in chemical feedstock, and obviously as an energy storage system as a backup for renewables. So I see that as the more important side of hydrogen's role in the transition, rather than as a fuel, with the exception of aircraft. I think that there will be a new generation of aircraft that will be designed to take hydrogen, because batteries are simply too heavy. But that's my personal view, and I've witted on too much. Sorry, gentlemen, your views on that?
I tend to think of the hydrogen revolution not as a wholesale revolution, but a revolution in certain application markets. And those application markets where they have global replication potential, the steel industry, for example, or cement manufacturing, for example, or heat conversion, for example. Those scalable application markets is how this market will build up. I think having a simplistic view that hydrogen will be used for heating or hydrogen will be used for electrification wholesale is again missing the point. So there will be sub markets which will have global potential, and the aggregation of those sub markets together is what will make a revolution. So I agree with you, Simon, that it is not an either or. There will be some elements of electrification along with some elements of hydrogen, and hydrogen will coexist with some elements of decarbonized gas, or it might actually exist alongside biomethane. So that coexistence potential, therefore, is still very much possible, and that makes making any forecasts really difficult, almost impossible.
Yeah,
Now
I
there
think that's
is
why we need to work in scenarios. Just one comment,
Yes.
Simon, then passing back. I think there is a scenario, and I think that's why, just to be fair, again, I'm just arguing against my own belief in hydrogen, but what I can imagine, and I'm hearing that because policymakers do really like hydrogen in some parts of the world, it gives your energy security, because that's, energy you can, if you have water and you have land, you can create renewable energy, convert water into energy. And so if country like Oman or Chile suddenly becomes an energy player, right? So there is this new factor which makes it for certain countries very interesting to look into hydrogen. And I think there could be downside, because then policymakers focus so much on helping that industry that they don't help some other industries, because that's the whole idea of focus. You give your time to something. So there are some proponents who say we're giving so much time to this, whilst perhaps there are other solutions which also require time. So that's, I think, one downside of giving attention to hydrogen.
Absolutely. Now, I am afraid that time has caught up with us, ladies and gentlemen. I do apologise that I didn't get round to all of the questions that were asked. We are going to submit them to our speakers after this session, and they will contact you directly with some potential answers. We're also going to be posting a recording of this presentation online in the next couple of days, so you can revisit our discussion and what our speakers have said. I'd also urge you to keep an eye on our forthcoming events page for more webinars, which include ethical digital technology, fact or fiction on the 26th of September, the emergence of wealth management in the Mauritius International Financial Centre on the 30th of September, Mission Impossible, restoring public trust in the police response to rape on the 1st of October, and The Art of Bullshit, how reframing can dramatically change outcomes and performance on the 3rd of October. So something for everyone there. You can catch up with all our previous webinars on YouTube and on our LinkedIn channels. It just remains for me to thank our fantastic speakers and you, our audience, for being so engaged and for providing so many insightful questions. I hope to see you again next time. Thank you very much and goodbye.